Victoria Ashford had everything money could buy. Her penthouse stretched across the entire top floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, with windows that overlooked Central Park. Crystal chandeliers hung from 20-foot ceilings. Marble covered the floors, and in the corner of her vast living room sat a black Steinway grand piano that cost more than most people earn in 5 years. The piano was beautiful, perfectly polished, and almost never played. It was there because expensive penthouses had grand pianos. That's just how things were in Victoria's world. Every Tuesday and Friday, Maria came to clean the penthouse. She'd worked for Victoria for nearly 8 years, arriving at 7 in the morning and leaving at 4 in the afternoon. Maria was quiet, efficient, and invisible in the way that Victoria preferred her staff to be. She did her job, collected her paycheck, and didn't ask questions or make small talk. But 3 months ago, something changed. Maria's usual child care arrangement fell through. Her neighbor, who watched her son after school, moved away suddenly. Daycare programs cost almost as much as Maria earned, and leaving a 12-year-old boy alone in their neighborhood until evening just wasn't safe. So Maria did what she had to do. She brought her son to work with her. "He won't be any trouble, Ms. Ashford," Maria had promised that first day, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Daniel will sit quietly and do his homework. You won't even know he's here." Victoria had barely looked up from her laptop. "Fine, just keep him out of my way." And for the most part, Daniel was exactly as promised. He was a small kid, skinny, with thick dark hair that fell into his eyes. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his textbooks spread out, working through math problems and reading assignments. Sometimes Victoria would walk past and see him there, but she trained herself not to really see him. He was just part of the background, like the potted plants or the abstract paintings on her walls. Daniel helped his mother sometimes. He'd carry the vacuum cleaner from room to room. He'd fold the expensive Egyptian cotton towels with careful precision. He dusted the shelves and the decorative objects that Victoria collected, but never really looked at. The boy moved through the apartment like a ghost, trying to make himself small, trying not to disturb the woman who owned everything around him. Victoria spent most of her days in her home office, managing her investments and attending video conferences with business partners across the globe. She'd inherited a technology company from her father and sold it for an amount of money that made headlines. Now she sat on various boards, invested in startups, and attended charity galas where people paid thousands of dollars for a seat at her table. She was 42 years old, divorced twice, and had no children. Her life was exactly as she'd designed it: controlled, predictable, perfect. It was a Wednesday afternoon in October when everything changed. Victoria was on a video call with a venture capital firm in San Francisco, discussing a potential investment in a new app. She was half listening, scrolling through financial projections on her second monitor when she heard it. Music. Piano music. Someone was playing her Steinway. Victoria's head snapped up. The sound was coming from her living room. She quickly muted her microphone. "I need to step away for a moment," she told the people on the call, not waiting for a response before turning off her camera. She walked quickly down the hallway, her heels clicking on the marble. The music grew louder. It wasn't just random notes or the kind of fumbling you'd expect from someone who didn't know how to play. This was real music, sophisticated music. The melody floated through the apartment with a kind of beauty that made her stop in the doorway. Daniel sat at the piano bench, his back straight, his small fingers moving across the keys with surprising confidence. His feet barely reached the pedals, so he sat forward on the bench, completely absorbed in what he was playing. His eyes were half closed, his head tilted slightly, and his whole body seemed to sway gently with the music. Victoria recognized the piece. It was Chopin, a nocturne. She'd taken piano lessons as a child. Endless Saturday mornings with a stern teacher who rapped her knuckles with a ruler when she made mistakes. She'd learned this exact piece when she was 14, and it had taken her months of practice to play it even adequately. This boy was playing it beautifully. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. Daniel's hands flew off the keys as if they'd been burned. He jumped up from the bench so quickly he nearly knocked it over. His face went pale, then flushed deep red. "I'm sorry," he stammered, backing away from the piano. "I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have—" Maria appeared from the hallway where she'd been changing the bed linens. Her face was stricken with panic. "Ms. Ashford, I apologize. This won't happen again. Daniel, what were you thinking? I just wanted to. I didn't mean. The boy looked like he might cry. Victoria held up her hand. That piano is extremely valuable. It's not a toy. She looked at Daniel directly for perhaps the first time since he'd started coming to the apartment. Where did you learn to play like that? Daniel glanced at his mother, then back at Victoria. I taught myself. I watch videos. At the library they have computers and He stopped, realizing this probably wasn't helping his case. You taught yourself? Victoria's tone was skeptical. That piece is not beginner level. I know, Daniel said quietly. I've been practicing for 3 years. Not on a real piano. We don't have one. But I practice on a keyboard at school sometimes, and I use the paper keyboard I printed out at home, and I love it. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have touched your piano. Maria grabbed Daniel's arm. We're very sorry, Ms. Ashford. I'll make sure he doesn't go near it again. Victoria looked at the boy, really looked at him. His clothes were worn but clean. His sneakers had holes in them. There was the intensity in his eyes, a hunger for something he couldn't have. She'd seen that look before, though she couldn't quite remember where. Just don't let it happen again, she said finally, turning back toward her office. And Daniel, your mother is here to work, not to babysit you while you play around. She heard Maria apologizing again as she walked away, heard the quiet sounds of the cleaning cart being moved, and then silence. Victoria returned to her video call, but she couldn't concentrate. The memory of that music kept interrupting her thoughts. Later that evening, after Maria and Daniel had left, Victoria walked over to the piano. She sat down on the bench and tried to play the Chopin Nocturne herself. Her fingers stumbled over the keys. She'd forgotten most of it. Years of expensive lessons, the best teacher's money could buy, and she could barely play a simple melody anymore. But that boy, that Maid's son who'd never had a real piano, had played it perfectly. Victoria closed the lid of the piano and walked away, bothered by something she couldn't quite name. It felt almost like envy, which was ridiculous. What did she have to be envious about? She owned the piano. She owned this entire apartment. She had everything. Still that night, she found herself searching online for the Chopin piece, listening to famous pianists perform it, trying to understand what she'd heard in her living room that afternoon, trying to understand why a 12-year-old boy's playing had unsettled her so deeply. She told herself it was nothing, just a child showing off. Nothing more, but deep down she knew it was something more, something real, something she'd lost a long time ago if she'd ever had it at all. The next few weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Victoria found herself paying attention to things she'd never noticed before. She'd listen for the sound of Daniel's footsteps in the apartment. She'd watch from her office doorway as he helped his mother fold laundry or dust the bookshelves. And she started doing something peculiar, something she couldn't quite explain even to herself. She began leaving sheet music on the piano. The first time she told herself it was just a test. She pulled out an old book of Beethoven sonatas from a drawer and left it open on the music stand. Moonlight Sonata, First Movement, a piece that most people recognized but that required real skill to play properly. She went to her office and waited. About an hour later, she heard it. The opening notes, slow and haunting, filled the apartment. She walked quietly to where she could see without being seen. Daniel was at the piano again, his eyes fixed on the sheet music, his fingers finding each note with careful precision. He played through the entire movement without a single mistake. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. It wasn't possible. This wasn't some piece he could have memorized from YouTube. He was sight-reading it, turning the pages, adjusting his tempo, interpreting the music in real time. She didn't confront him this time. She just went back to her office and tried to focus on work. The next week, she left something harder. Rachmaninoff, a prelude in C-sharp minor, full of dramatic chords and complex rhythms. It was a piece she'd attempted as a teenager and failed to master despite months of lessons with a teacher who charged $200 an hour. Daniel played it flawlessly the next day. Victoria couldn't let it go. She started leaving more challenging pieces, Liszt, Prokofiev, Scriabin. Each time Daniel would play them when he thought no one was listening. And each time Victoria would stand in her hallway hidden from view, listening to this impossible child make music that shouldn't have been possible. She started researching child prodigies online late at night. She read about Mozart composing at age 5, about young pianists from China and Russia who could play entire concertos by age 10. But all of them had something Daniel didn't have. They had teachers, resources, pianos of their own. They came from families who could afford to nurture their talent. Daniel had nothing but a worn-out backpack and holes in his shoes. It bothered Victoria more than she wanted to admit. Not the talent itself, but what it represented. She'd had every advantage growing up. The best schools. The finest teachers. Her parents had bought her that first piano when she was 7, a beautiful upright that cost thousands of dollars. She'd had it all, and she'd walked away from music without a second thought because it was hard and she wasn't naturally gifted. But this boy, with nothing, was genuinely extraordinary. 3 weeks after she'd first heard Daniel play, Victoria was hosting one of her regular dinner parties. 8 people were coming, all from her social circle. Wealthy investors, board members, people who summered in the Hamptons and knew which restaurants required reservations 6 months in advance. The catering company had set up appetizers in the living room, and a bartender was preparing drinks. Maria was scheduled to work that evening, helping serve and clean up afterward. Which meant Daniel would be there too, probably hiding in the kitchen doing homework while the adults drank wine that cost more per bottle than his mother earned in a day. The guests arrived promptly at 7. Victoria played her role perfectly, greeting everyone with air kisses and leading them to the living room where champagne was being poured. The conversation flowed in the predictable patterns of their world. Stock portfolios, real estate investments, complaints about their summer homes needing renovation. Victoria's friend Christine was talking about her daughter's struggles at Juilliard when the idea came to Victoria. It wasn't a kind idea. Later, she'd wonder what possessed her, but in that moment, with all her successful friends around her, she felt a sudden urge to expose what she believed was a fraud, to prove that Daniel's playing was just a trick, just memorization, nothing truly special. "You know," Victoria said, interrupting Christine, "I have someone here tonight who plays piano. Maria's son. The boy is quite talented." Maria, who was refilling water glasses, froze. Her face went pale. "Oh, how wonderful," Christine exclaimed. "I'd love to hear him play." "Actually, I insist," Victoria said, her voice taking on that tone she used when she wasn't really asking. "Daniel, would you come in here, please?" Daniel appeared from the kitchen, looking confused and frightened. He was wearing the same jeans and faded t-shirt he'd worn to school that day. Next to Victoria's guests in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry, he looked even smaller and more out of place than usual. "Ms. Ashford," he said quietly. "These are my friends," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've told them you play piano. Why don't you play something for us?" She saw Maria's expression, the mixture of pride and terror. She saw Daniel's hands trembling slightly at his sides. And she saw her guests looking at the boy with curiosity and thinly veiled skepticism. "I don't know if—" Daniel started. "Please," Victoria said. "We'd all love to hear you." It was a command, not a request. Daniel walked slowly to the piano and sat down. The room fell completely silent. Victoria's guests held their champagne flutes, waiting. Victoria herself felt a strange anticipation, almost excitement. She was certain he'd fail under pressure, that whatever he'd been doing when no one was watching couldn't be replicated in front of an audience. Daniel's hands hovered over the keys for a moment. Then he began to play. The piece he chose was Liszt's La Campanella. Victoria recognized it immediately. It was one of the most technically difficult pieces in classical piano repertoire, full of impossible jumps and rapid passages that required years of training to execute. Professional pianists struggled with it. Daniel played it perfectly, more than perfectly. He didn't just hit the right notes. He made the piano sing. His small hands flew across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for a child. The music filled the enormous living room, bouncing off the high ceilings, wrapping around everyone present. It was playful and joyful and heartbreakingly beautiful. Victoria watched her guests' faces change. The skepticism melted away, replaced by genuine shock. Christine's mouth hung open. A man named Robert, who'd performed at Carnegie Hall in his youth, leaned forward in his seat, his eyes wide. The bartender had stopped pouring drinks and was staring at Daniel like he was witnessing something miraculous. When Daniel finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then everyone erupted in applause. Real applause. Not the polite kind people give at boring charity events. Christine stood up, clapping enthusiastically. Robert whistled. My God, Christine said. Where does he study? Who's his teacher? Victoria opened her mouth but couldn't find words. Maria stepped forward, her voice shaking. He doesn't have a teacher. He's never had lessons? He teaches himself. The room erupted in questions. How is that possible?
Had he been tested for the conservatory?
Did he have a piano at home? Had they recorded him? Posted videos online? Maria answered quietly, honestly. No piano at home. No lessons. No money for any of that. Just a boy who loved music and found ways to practice wherever he could. Victoria watched her friends surround Daniel, asking him questions, complimenting him, treating him like he was somebody important. She watched Christine pull out her phone and start making calls to people she knew on the board of the Manhattan Conservatory. She watched Robert shake Daniel's hand like he was a colleague, not just a child. And Victoria felt something ugly rising in her chest. Not pride, not happiness for Daniel, something darker, something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. These people were supposed to be impressed by her apartment, her success, her carefully curated life. Instead, they couldn't stop talking about her maid's son. Daniel caught her eye from across the room. He smiled uncertainly, perhaps hoping she was pleased. But Victoria turned away and walked to the kitchen, suddenly needing to be anywhere else. She could still hear them in the living room, still hear the excitement in their voices as they discussed Daniel's future, his potential, his gift. And Victoria realized with cold clarity that she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd meant to embarrass him, to expose him as ordinary. Instead, she'd revealed something she wasn't prepared to face, that some things can't be bought. Some gifts don't come from privilege or money or the right connections. Some people are just born with something real, and Victoria had nothing real at all. The morning after the dinner party, Victoria woke up to 17 text messages. She lay in bed, scrolling through them with growing irritation. Every single one was about Daniel. Christine had sent 4 messages alone, each more enthusiastic than the last. Still thinking about that incredible boy? And do you have Maria's number? I want to connect her with the conservatory. And Victoria, you've been hiding a genius in your home. Others were similar. Her friend Patricia wanted to know if Daniel had a manager. Robert had sent a link to a YouTube video of a famous child pianist adding, Daniel is better than this kid and this one has millions of views. Victoria deleted the messages without responding to any of them. She got out of bed and made herself coffee, standing at her kitchen window looking out over Central Park. It was a gray November morning, the kind where the city felt cold and empty despite being full of people. She kept thinking about the night before, about the look on her guests' faces when Daniel played, about how they'd gathered around him like he was the most important person in the room, about how she'd stood in her own kitchen in her own home feeling invisible. It was ridiculous. She was Victoria Ashford. She had a net worth that most people couldn't even comprehend. She'd been featured in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. She sat on the boards of 3 major companies. People paid attention when she spoke, but none of that seemed to matter next to a 12-year-old boy who could make a piano sing. By afternoon, Victoria had made a decision. When Maria arrived for her regular Friday shift, Victoria was waiting in the living room. Maria, we need to talk, Victoria said before Maria could even put her cleaning supplies down. Maria's face went pale. She knew that tone. Yes, Ms. Ashford? Is Daniel with you today? No, ma'am. It's Friday, so he has a half day at school. He'll be at the library until I'm done here. Good. Victoria stood up, crossing her arms. Maria, I've been thinking about our arrangement. Having Daniel here after school, it's become a distraction. This is my home, and I need it to be a professional environment. Maria's hands tightened on the handle of her cleaning caddy. I understand, Miss Ashford. I'll make sure Daniel doesn't touch the piano again. He knows he shouldn't have. It's not just about the piano, Victoria interrupted. It's about maintaining appropriate boundaries. This is a workplace, not a daycare center. I'm going to have to insist that Daniel no longer comes here with you. The color drained completely from Maria's face. Ms. Ashford, please. I have nowhere else for him to go. The after-school programs are full, and I can't afford a babysitter on what I earn. And our neighborhood, it's not safe for him to be alone. Surely you can work something out, Victoria said, her voice cold. Other working mothers manage. Other working mothers make more than minimum wage. Maria said quietly. and Victoria could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, Miss Ashford, you've seen how quiet he is. How helpful. I promise he won't be any trouble." Victoria felt a flicker of something, maybe guilt, but she pushed it down. "My decision is final. Starting Monday, Daniel cannot come here anymore. If this arrangement doesn't work for you, I'll understand if you need to find another position." It was a threat, and they both knew it. Maria needed this job. She'd been working for Victoria for 8 years, and the pay, while not generous, was steady. Finding another position that would be as flexible, that would look the other way when she needed to leave early for a parent-teacher conference or when Daniel was sick. "Wouldn't be easy. I understand," Maria finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting me know." Victoria nodded and walked back to her office, closing the door. She tried to work, tried to focus on the spreadsheets and emails that filled her screen, but she kept seeing Maria's face, the fear in her eyes, the way her hands had trembled. She pushed the image away. This was her home. She had the right to set boundaries. She didn't owe anyone anything. The weekend passed slowly. Victoria attended a charity brunch on Saturday, where 2 different people asked her about the piano prodigy. She changed the subject both times. On Sunday, she tried to read but couldn't concentrate. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, even though it had always been quiet and empty before. Monday morning came, and Maria arrived alone. She was quieter than usual, her movements mechanical as she went about her work. Victoria stayed in her office, avoiding her. It was easier not to see the sadness in Maria's eyes. But avoiding Maria didn't stop the phone calls. Christine called on Tuesday, frustrated that Victoria hadn't responded to her messages. "I spoke to my friend Helen at the Manhattan Conservatory," Christine said excitedly. "She wants to meet Daniel. This could be life-changing for him, Victoria. A full scholarship, the best teachers in the world. You have to give me Maria's contact information." "I don't think that's appropriate," Victoria said stiffly. "Maria is my employee. I need to maintain professional boundaries." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you serious right now? We're talking about a child's future, a child with extraordinary talent. Christine, I really need to go. What's going on with you?" Christine's voice had lost its friendly tone. "Everyone's been talking about this. Why are you being so weird about it?" Victoria hung up. She turned off her phone and sat in silence, feeling something heavy settling in her chest. Over the next few weeks, more messages came. Not just from Christine, but from others who'd been at the dinner party. Patricia wanted to feature Daniel in an article she was writing for a lifestyle magazine. Robert wanted to introduce him to a conductor friend who was always looking for young talent. Even people who hadn't been at the party were reaching out, having heard about Daniel through the social grapevine that connected New York's wealthy elite. Victoria ignored them all. She told herself she was protecting Maria's privacy, maintaining appropriate boundaries. But late at night, alone in her enormous apartment, she knew the truth. She wasn't protecting anyone. She was trying to make Daniel disappear, to erase the reminder of what she'd seen in her living room that night, the reminder that real talent, real genius, couldn't be bought or learned or inherited, that some people were born with gifts that all the money in the world couldn't purchase, and that she, with all her advantages and opportunities, had never had anything that came close to what Daniel had in his small, worn-out hands. One evening in early December, Victoria was walking past her piano when she stopped. The sheet music for La Campanella was still sitting on the music stand, left there from the last time Daniel had played. She picked it up, looking at the complex notes and impossible rhythms. She sat down at the bench and tried to play it. Her fingers stumbled over the keys. She couldn't even get through the first page. The music that had flowed so effortlessly from Daniel's hands was completely beyond her reach, and always would be. Victoria closed the piano lid and walked away. She looked around her penthouse at all the expensive things she'd collected over the years. The designer furniture, the original artwork, the crystal and silver and marble, objects that announced to the world that she was successful, important, someone who mattered. But standing there in her perfect living room, surrounded by all her perfect things, Victoria felt more empty than she'd ever felt in her life. She thought about Daniel wherever he was now, probably at home in some small apartment, practicing on a paper keyboard he'd printed from the internet. Or maybe at the library, watching videos on an old computer, teaching himself pieces that professional musicians spent years trying to master. She thought about Maria, working her shifts in silence, worried about her son being alone after school in a neighborhood that wasn't safe, probably taking extra jobs on weekends to try to make ends meet, sacrificing everything for a child who had a gift that could change his life if only someone would give him a chance. And Victoria had closed the door on that chance. Not because Daniel had done anything wrong, not because it was the right thing to do, but because seeing his talent made her feel small, made her realize that all her money and success and carefully constructed life amounted to less than what a 12-year-old boy could create with just a piano and his own two hands. She picked up her phone and stared at Christine's number. One call. That's all it would take to change everything. To give Daniel the opportunities he deserved. To be part of something meaningful instead of just being someone who owned expensive things. But Victoria didn't make the call. She put the phone down and went to bed, pulling the covers over her head, trying not to think about the choice she was making, trying not to think about the person she was becoming. 3 months passed. Winter settled over New York City, covering everything in a layer of gray cold. Victoria went through her days in the same routine she'd always followed. Morning coffee, video conferences, investment meetings, charity events where she smiled for photos and wrote checks that meant nothing to her bank account. Maria still came to clean on Tuesdays and Fridays. They barely spoke now. The easy professional relationship they'd maintained for 8 years had frozen into something uncomfortable. Maria did her work efficiently and left exactly on time. Daniel's name was never mentioned. Victoria told herself everything was back to normal. Better than normal, actually. Her home was quiet again. No distractions. No reminders of things she didn't want to think about. But sometimes, late at night, she'd walk past the piano and remember the sound of Daniel's playing. She'd remember the look on his face when he played, that expression of pure joy and focus, and she'd feel something twist inside her chest before she pushed the feeling away and went to bed. It was a Friday evening in March when everything changed. Victoria had been invited to the annual Manhattan Conservatory Benefit Gala, one of the biggest events of the spring social season. She'd bought a table for $50,000 like she did every year. The ticket price was tax-deductible, and it was the kind of event where she needed to be seen, where connections were made and deals were discussed over champagne and orchestra music. She arrived in a black designer gown, diamonds at her throat and wrists. The conservatory's concert hall was magnificent, all chandeliers and gold trim and seats upholstered in red velvet. Her table was near the front, filled with other donors she'd known for years. They made small talk about their recent vacations and upcoming summer plans while waiters served the first course. The program started with the conservatory's director giving a speech about the importance of supporting young musicians. Victoria barely listened. She'd heard versions of this speech a dozen times before. Then the orchestra performed a few pieces. They were good, technically proficient, exactly what you'd expect from students at one of the world's premier music schools. Victoria was checking her phone under the table when the director returned to the microphone. "And now," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "we have a very special surprise for you tonight." 3 months ago, a video began circulating online. It showed a young boy performing at a private gathering. The video was filmed without his knowledge, posted by one of the guests who was so moved by what they heard that they wanted to share it with the world. Victoria's hand froze on her phone. A cold feeling spread through her stomach. "That video has now been viewed over 12 million times," the director continued. "It caught the attention of musicians, critics, and music lovers around the world. And it caught the attention of someone very special, a retired concert pianist who was so impressed by what he saw that he contacted us immediately." The lights dimmed. A screen lowered behind the orchestra and a video began to play. Victoria recognized her living room immediately. The camera angle was from near the dining area, probably filmed by someone standing during the dinner party. And there was Daniel, sitting at her piano, his small hands moving across the keys as he played La Campanella. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but Daniel's playing came through clearly. Victoria watched her own piano on the screen, watched Daniel's concentrated face, and remembered that night. Remembered how she'd felt standing in her kitchen while her guests surrounded him with praise. Someone at her table gasped, "Is that the same boy?" "From your party, Victoria." Victoria couldn't speak. She just stared at the screen as the video played. "This young musician," the director said as the video ended, has never had a formal piano lesson. He taught himself by watching videos and practicing on paper keyboards. When our retired pianist, the legendary Vincent Chen, saw this video, he immediately offered to sponsor a full scholarship for this remarkable child. Ladies and gentlemen, performing tonight with our orchestra, please welcome 12-year-old Daniel Torres. The audience erupted in applause. Victoria sat frozen in her seat as Daniel walked onto the stage. He was wearing a suit that was clearly borrowed, the sleeves a bit too long, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. His mother, Maria, stood in the wings. Victoria could just barely see her, wearing what looked like her best dress, her hands clasped together as tears streamed down her face. Daniel sat at the grand piano on stage. The orchestra behind him waited, their instruments ready. The conductor raised his baton, and then Daniel began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Victoria had heard this piece performed by some of the world's greatest pianists. She'd attended concerts at Carnegie Hall and the Kennedy Center. She'd heard recordings by legends whose names were known around the world, but she had never heard anything like what Daniel did that night. He didn't just play the notes. He made the music breathe and soar and cry. His small hands pulled emotions from the piano that Victoria didn't know were possible. The orchestra played around him, following his lead, and together they created something that made the entire audience sit in absolute stillness, afraid to move and break the spell. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the entire hall exploded. People leaped to their feet, applauding, shouting. The conductor set down his baton and embraced Daniel. Orchestra members were smiling, some of them wiping their eyes. And Daniel, small and humble in his borrowed suit, stood and bowed, looking overwhelmed by the response. Victoria remained seated while everyone around her stood and cheered. She felt like she couldn't breathe. She watched Maria rush onto the stage and wrap her arms around her son. Watched the conservatory director shake Daniel's hand. Watched photographers swarm forward to capture the moment. Her friend Patricia leaned down, shouting over the applause. "Victoria! That's your maid's son. You never told us he was coming here. How did you not mention this?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain? How could she admit what she'd done? The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes. Critics in the audience were already typing on their phones, sending reviews to their publications. A reporter from the New York Times was interviewing Maria in the wings. A famous conductor was waiting to speak with Daniel, probably to offer him opportunities Victoria couldn't even imagine. Finally, people began to sit down. The director returned to the microphone, his face flushed with excitement. "This young man represents everything our conservatory stands for," he said. "Raw talent, dedication, and the transformative power of music education. Thanks to the generosity of Vincent Chen and several anonymous donors, Daniel will receive a full scholarship to our program, including private lessons with Master Chen himself." More applause. The director continued. "Daniel's story reminds us that genius can emerge from anywhere. That talent doesn't care about wealth or privilege. It only needs opportunity. And tonight we celebrate not just Daniel's gift, but his mother, Maria, who has worked multiple jobs to support her son's dreams, who never gave up on him even in the hardest times." A spotlight found Maria in the wings. The audience applauded again. Victoria could see Maria's face, overwhelmed with emotion, as people around her congratulated her. "Tomorrow's newspapers are calling this the discovery of the decade," the director said. "I believe we're watching the debut of a once-in-a-generation talent. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Torres." One final wave of applause washed through the hall as Daniel bowed again. Then he and his mother were escorted backstage, surrounded by important people who wanted to talk to them, to be part of this moment, to say they'd been there when everything changed. Victoria sat at her $50,000 table, surrounded by her wealthy friends, and felt completely invisible. Patricia and the others were talking excitedly about the performance, about Daniel's future, about how amazing it was that such talent had been hiding right under Victoria's nose. "You must feel so proud," Christine said, touching Victoria's arm, "having been the one to discover him. That video from your party is what started all of this." Victoria managed a weak smile and nodded, but inside she felt hollow. She hadn't discovered Daniel. She'd tried to bury him. And while she'd been trying to make him disappear, the rest of the world had found him anyway. After the performance, there was a reception. Victoria moved through the crowd in a daze. Everywhere she turned, people were talking about Daniel. She overheard bits of conversation, concert offers, recording contracts, television appearances. One famous music producer was telling someone that Daniel's story was pure gold, the kind of thing that captures hearts worldwide. Victoria saw Daniel and Maria across the room, surrounded by admirers. Maria's face glowed with joy and pride. Daniel looked tired but happy, shaking hands and answering questions with the quiet politeness that Victoria remembered from her apartment. She thought about walking over, about congratulating them, but what would she say? That she was sorry she'd tried to extinguish his light? That her own insecurity had nearly cost him everything? Instead, Victoria left the gala early. She walked out into the cold March night and got into her car. Her driver asked if she'd enjoyed the performance. She said yes, not trusting herself to say more. When she got home, her apartment felt emptier than ever. She stood in front of the piano, the same piano Daniel had played 3 months ago. The same piano she'd forbidden him to touch. The same piano that had been sitting silent and unused for years because she'd never had the dedication to be good at something that required real effort. Victoria thought about all the opportunities she'd been given in her life. The best schools, the finest teachers, every door opened, every path smoothed by money and connections. And what had she done with all those advantages? She'd built a successful but hollow life. She owned things. She attended events. She wrote checks. But she'd never created anything real. Never dedicated herself to anything that required sacrifice or struggle or genuine passion. Meanwhile, Daniel, with nothing but love for music and a determination that Victoria had never possessed, had become extraordinary. Victoria sat down on the couch and cried for the first time in years. The morning after the gala, Victoria woke up to her phone buzzing constantly. News articles about Daniel were everywhere. The New York Times called him a prodigy who emerged from poverty to stun the classical music world. Music magazines were running features about his incredible journey. Social media was flooded with videos of his performance, people sharing the story of the boy who taught himself piano on paper keyboards. Victoria read every article. Each one mentioned the viral video from a private gathering. Some articles had tracked down guests from her dinner party who described the moment they first heard Daniel play. But Victoria's name appeared nowhere. She'd been erased from the story completely, which was exactly what she'd wanted 3 months ago. Now it just made her feel more invisible. She got out of bed and walked through her apartment. Everything looked the same as it always had. Expensive furniture? Original artwork. Floor-to-ceiling windows with million-dollar views. But it all felt meaningless now. Like she was living in a museum of her own wealth, surrounded by beautiful things that had no soul. Victoria made coffee and sat at her kitchen island, staring at her phone. She'd been holding the same thought in her mind for hours now, turning it over and over, examining it from every angle. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed before she could talk herself out of it. "Hello?" Maria's voice sounded tired but happy. "Maria, it's Victoria Ashford." There was a long pause. "I saw Daniel's performance last night. It was extraordinary. Thank you, Ms. Ashford." Maria's voice became careful, formal, the way she'd always spoken to Victoria. "I was wondering if we could talk. If you and Daniel would be willing to meet with me. I know I have no right to ask, but it's important." Another pause. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Miss Ashford. Please." Victoria heard the desperation in her own voice. "Just coffee, 1 hour. I need to say something to both of you." Maria was quiet for so long that Victoria thought she might hang up. Finally, she said, "Okay, there's a cafe near our apartment. I'll text you the address." 2 hours later, Victoria walked into a small coffee shop in a neighborhood she'd never visited before. It was nothing like the places she usually went. No fancy espresso machines or imported pastries, just simple coffee and a few tables by the window. Daniel and Maria were already there, sitting at a corner table. Daniel looked different somehow. More confident. He was wearing a new jacket, probably bought with money from one of the opportunities that had come flooding in after the performance. Victoria ordered a coffee she didn't want and sat down across from them. Up close, she could see how tired Maria looked. How much older she seemed than when Victoria had first hired her 8 years ago. Years of hard work and sacrifice were written in the lines around her eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Victoria said. Her hands were shaking slightly, so she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I want to apologize. For everything. For how I treated you both. For banning Daniel from my home. For trying to keep people from knowing about his talent. Maria's expression didn't change. You made your feelings clear, Miss Ashford. I know. And I was wrong. Completely wrong. Victoria looked at Daniel, who was watching her quietly. I was jealous of you. That's the truth. I saw something in you that I've never had and never will have. Real talent. Real dedication. And instead of celebrating it, I tried to make it disappear because it made me feel small. Daniel glanced at his mother, then back at Victoria. I never meant to make you feel bad, Miss Ashford. I just wanted to play the piano. I know that now. Victoria felt tears threatening but pushed them back. You did nothing wrong. This was all me. My insecurity. My pettiness. And I'm so sorry. They sat in silence for a moment. The cafe was busy around them. People coming and going, living their normal lives, while Victoria tried to figure out how to fix something she'd broken. I want to do something, Victoria finally said. I've been thinking about it all night. I want to start a foundation. A scholarship fund for underprivileged children with musical talent. Kids like Daniel who have the ability but not the resources. I can fund it myself, make sure it actually helps people. Maria's eyebrows rose slightly. That's very generous. It's not generous. It's the least I can do. Victoria leaned forward. And I was hoping you'd both be willing to be part of it. Daniel's story could inspire other kids. Show them that talent can come from anywhere. That they don't have to give up on their dreams just because they don't have money. I don't know, Maria said slowly. We've been through a lot these past few months. I'm not sure we want to be part of anything connected to. She stopped herself, but Victoria knew what she was going to say. Connected to you, I understand. But I'm asking anyway, because this isn't really about me. It's about making sure other kids don't have to teach themselves on paper keyboards. Making sure other mothers don't have to work 3 jobs while their children's talents go unnoticed. Daniel spoke up quietly. Mom, maybe we should think about it. If it could help other kids like me. Maria looked at her son, her expression softening. You're too forgiving, mijo. Maybe, Daniel shrugged. But you always told me that holding on to anger just makes you tired. And I'm not angry. I got everything I dreamed of. I get to study with Master Chen. I get to play real pianos every day. I'm happy. Victoria felt something break inside her chest. This child, who'd had every reason to be bitter, who'd been treated poorly by someone with all the power, was choosing kindness instead of resentment. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Victoria said to Daniel. Either of you. But if you'd be willing to work with me on this foundation, I promise I'll do everything I can to make it matter, to make it help people. Maria was quiet for a long time, studying Victoria's face. Finally, she said, I need to think about it. And I need to be honest with you, Miss Ashford. I found another job, a better one, with a family who treats me with respect. I won't be coming back to clean your apartment. I'm glad, Victoria said. And she meant it. You deserve better than how I treated you. Yes, I did. Maria's voice was firm. I worked for you for 8 years. I was reliable, honest, good at my job, and you never really saw me. Not until my son played your piano and impressed your friends. The words stung because they were completely true. Victoria had never really looked at Maria, had never wondered about her life, her struggles, her dreams. She'd been invisible just like Victoria felt now. You're right, Victoria said. I'm sorry for that too. They talked for another half hour. Victoria explained her vision for the foundation. Scholarship programs, instrument donations, free lessons for kids who couldn't afford them. She'd already spoken to her lawyer about setting it up, dedicating a significant portion of her wealth to make it work. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel held out his hand to shake Victoria's. His hand was small and warm, calloused from hours of practice. Thank you for letting me play your piano that first time, he said. Even though you were angry, that day changed my life. Someone at your party filmed me and that video changed everything. Victoria shook his hand, fighting back tears. You changed your own life, Daniel. Your talent, your dedication, that's all you. I just happened to have a piano. As she watched them leave the cafe together, Maria's hand on Daniel's shoulder, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. A sense that she might be able to become someone better than who she'd been. That evening, Victoria sat at her piano for the first time in months. She pulled out the beginner books from when she was a child, the simple pieces she'd abandoned when they got too hard. She placed her fingers on the keys and started to play. Her playing was clumsy, full of mistakes, nothing like Daniel's gift, but she kept playing anyway. Not because she'd ever be great. Not because anyone would ever applaud her. But because for the first time in her life she was doing something real. Something that required effort and patience and humility. Something that couldn't be bought or delegated or achieved through connections and money. She practiced for an hour, stumbling through simple melodies, and when she finally stopped, her fingers were sore and she'd made 1,000 mistakes. But she felt more alive than she had in years. Victoria looked around her apartment at all the expensive things that had never made her happy. And she made another decision. Tomorrow she'd call her real estate agent. This place was too big, too empty, too much a monument to everything she'd been chasing without ever asking why, maybe. It was time to live in a place that felt like a home. Instead of a museum, maybe. It was time to stop collecting expensive things and start building an actual life. Over the next few months, Victoria threw herself into the foundation work. Maria eventually agreed to serve on the board, helping identify kids who needed support. Daniel became the face of the foundation, his story inspiring hundreds of families to apply for scholarships. Victoria attended every event, every fundraiser, but she stayed in the background. This wasn't about her redemption or her reputation. This was about making sure kids with talent got chances they deserved. One afternoon, 6 months after the gala, Victoria attended a foundation event where 20 children were receiving their first instruments. She watched their faces light up as they held violins and trumpets and even a small keyboard for a 6-year-old girl who reminded Victoria of Daniel. Maria stood beside her, and they watched together as the children explored their new instruments, filling the room with chaotic, joyful noise. "Thank you for this," Maria said quietly, "for really following through." "Thank you for giving me a chance to do something that matters," Victoria replied. She never got her friendship with Maria back, not really. Too much had happened, too much hurt had been caused. But they built something new, a working relationship based on respect and a shared purpose. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was honest, and that was enough. Victoria learned that you can't undo the past. You can't take back the ways you've hurt people or the opportunities you've wasted. But you can choose every single day to be better than you were before. She thought about Daniel sometimes, practicing in her living room, pulling music from her piano that she'd never been able to create. She'd seen it as a threat then, a reminder of her own limitations. Now she understood it was a gift, a glimpse of something real in a life that had been built entirely on surfaces. It had shown her what she was missing, and that had hurt. But sometimes the things that hurt the most are the things you need to see.